You are standing on a hillside in southeastern Turkey, and the year is roughly 9600 BCE. There is no Stonehenge yet. There is no Great Pyramid. Agriculture itself has not been invented. The wheel is thousands of years from conception. And yet, beneath your feet, buried under limestone bedrock, at a place the locals will one day call Göbekli Tepe, hunter-gatherers who supposedly possess nothing more sophisticated than flint tools and oral tradition, are quarrying, carving, and erecting T-shaped limestone pillars that weigh up to 16 tons apiece. Some stand nearly 6 meters tall. They are covered in bas-relief carvings of foxes, boars, vultures, and scorpions, arranged with a precision that implies planning, hierarchy, and shared symbolic language. This should not exist. Not here. Not now. The site was first excavated seriously in 1995 by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute, who spent the rest of his life trying to explain what he had found. Radiocarbon dating placed the oldest layers at roughly 11,500 years old, predating Stonehenge by about 6,000 years, and predating the pyramids of Giza by close to 7,000. Schmidt's excavations revealed at least 20 distinct circular enclosures, only a handful of which have been fully uncovered. Ground-penetrating radar surveys, conducted by the German Research Foundation, suggest as many as 200 more pillars remain buried. Across the 16 structures still underground, 16 structures, buried deliberately, not by time, but by the very people who built them. Here is where the accepted narrative starts to strain. Conventional archaeology insists that monumental architecture is a product of settled agricultural societies. You need surplus food, a labor force freed from subsistence hunting, and centralized authority to organize thousands of person-hours of quarrying and transport. Göbekli Tepe predates agriculture in the region by at least 1,000 years. There were no domesticated grains yet, and no permanent village infrastructure discovered nearby capable of supporting the workforce this project would have required. Schmidt himself proposed a radical inversion of the standard model, that the temple came first, and farming was invented afterward, perhaps to feed the workers who gathered seasonally to build and maintain it. Religion, in his formulation, didn't follow civilization. Religion built civilization. And then there is the burial. Around 8000 BCE, the people who built and used Göbekli Tepe systematically filled in every enclosure with rubble and soil, entombing their own life's work under hundreds of tons of debris, preserving it perfectly for the next 10,000 years. Why would you build something so monumental and then deliberately erase it? Mainstream researchers suggest ritual decommissioning, a kind of ceremonial closing of sacred space once its purpose was fulfilled. Alternative researchers point to something else, a pattern, repeated at site after site around the world, of advanced or anomalous knowledge being sealed away rather than passed forward, as if something catastrophic made concealment safer than continuity. What kind of society organizes hundreds of workers with no coercive state apparatus? What symbolic system requires foxes and vultures, and headless men carved into 11,000-year-old stone? Why does the sophistication of the oldest enclosures, Layer 3, appear to exceed the cruder pillars of the more recent Layer 2, suggesting decline rather than progress? Why bury genius instead of building on it? Somewhere under a Turkish hillside, the answers are still sealed in soil, waiting, the way the builders apparently wanted them to wait. From the highlands of Anatolia, we travel across 2 hemispheres to the shallow lagoons of Micronesia, to an island called Pohnpei, where the ocean itself seems to have been reorganized into architecture. You are wading through warm, brackish water between towering black walls of stone, and you cannot explain how they got here. This is Nan Madol, sometimes called the Venice of the Pacific, a city of nearly 100 artificial islets built atop a coral reef, constructed almost entirely from massive columns of basalt, a volcanic rock that forms naturally in hexagonal, log-like prisms. The scale defies the resources available to the people who supposedly built it. Archaeologists, including J. Stephen Athens, who conducted extensive fieldwork on Pohnpei in the 1990s, estimate that the total volume of basalt columns used at Nan Madol exceeds 750,000 metric tons. Some individual columns weigh up to 50 tons. The nearest quarry capable of producing this stone sits on the opposite side of the island, roughly 25 kilometers away, meaning every single column had to be transported by sea, on rafts, using a population estimated at its peak to have numbered only in the low tens of thousands. No metal tools, no wheel, no draft animals of any kind on an isolated Pacific island. Conventional dating places the major construction phase between 1200 and 1500 CE, attributed to the Saudeleur dynasty, a ruling lineage remembered in Pohnpeian oral tradition as having consolidated absolute authority over the island. Here is the anomaly that keeps researchers awake. The precision stacking of the basalt logs, interlocked in a technique resembling a log cabin structure, alternating layers for stability without any mortar, has no clear engineering precedent anywhere else in the Pacific. There's no evidence of a preceding, simpler phase of construction. Nan Madol appears in the archaeological record close to fully formed, an architectural style with no obvious ancestor. Local oral history claims the stones were levitated into place by twin sorcerers, Olisipa and Olosopa, using magical flight. Mainstream researchers dismiss this as folklore encoding forgotten engineering, perhaps kite-assisted transport, or an unrecorded system of log rollers and canals. But no physical evidence of ramps, canals, or roller systems has ever been recovered at the site. Radiocarbon dates from beneath the foundational structures have occasionally returned results as early as 200 BCE, over 1,000 years before the accepted construction era, suggesting the site may have been built, abandoned, and rebuilt across a span of time nobody has fully reconciled. Why does a Pacific island culture with no history of monumental stonework suddenly produce one of the largest stone construction projects outside Egypt or Mesoamerica? Why does local memory insist on flight rather than force? What was actually moving these 50-ton columns across open water? The lagoon keeps its silence, the black stone glistening under equatorial sun, indifferent to the fact that nobody, anywhere, can fully explain how it got there. We move now from ocean to mountain, from Micronesia to the Zhejiang province of eastern China, into the earth itself. You are descending a wooden staircase into darkness lit only by artificial floodlights, and the walls around you rise more than 30 meters overhead, carved with parallel chisel marks so uniform they look machine-stamped. This is the Longyu Caves, a network of at least 24 massive underground chambers, discovered accidentally in 1992 when local villagers drained a pond that had concealed the entrances for generations. Nobody in the surrounding villages had any record, oral or written, of these caves ever being built. Each chamber is a feat of engineering in its own right. The largest halls span thousands of square meters, supported by carefully placed stone pillars left standing amid the excavation, evenly spaced, load-bearing, and precisely angled, evidence of structural calculation, not haphazard mining. The walls are covered edge to edge with parallel diagonal tool marks, spaced with almost identical intervals, a pattern replicated across every single chamber examined. Researchers estimate that excavating this network by hand would have required removing over 1 million cubic meters of rock, and would have taken a workforce of 1,000 laborers working continuously for approximately 6 years, using tools no more advanced than iron chisels. The central mystery isn't the scale, it's the silence. No historical Chinese text, and China possesses one of the most continuous written historical records in the world, spanning more than 3,000 years, makes any reference to this project. No dynasty claims it. No inscriptions inside the caves identify a purpose, a patron, or a date. Attempts at dating have relied on comparing tool mark technique and pottery shards found nearby, tentatively placing construction somewhere in the Ming dynasty or earlier, but estimates from different research teams have ranged across a window of more than 1,000 years, an almost unheard-of margin of uncertainty for a project of this magnitude. Mainstream Chinese archaeologists generally treat the caves as a quarry, extracting stone for regional construction, with the strange uniform tool marks explained as a byproduct of a standardized cutting technique lost to time. But quarries leave debris, discarded stone, evidence of an export route. Almost none has been definitively linked to Longyu. Why would a civilization capable of leaving records of grain harvests and minor court intrigues leave absolutely nothing about a 1,000,000 cubic meter excavation? Why do the tool marks show a consistency that modern experimental archaeologists, using replica ancient tools, have struggled to replicate at this scale? What happened to the material removed from 24 caverns the size of cathedrals? Somewhere beneath a flooded pond in eastern China, an empire dug out a mountain and told no one why. From that buried silence we travel south and west, to the high grasslands of South Africa's Mpumalanga province, where a different kind of structure waits in plain sight, disguised for centuries as nothing more than piles of rock among cattle pastures. You are standing at dawn on a low ridge, and as the light shifts, an enormous stone monolith beside you begins to align, its shadow falling with unnerving precision toward a horizon marker positioned kilometers away. This is Adam's calendar, sometimes called Africa's Stonehenge, a formation of standing stones that local researcher and pilot Johann Heine identified from the air in the early 2000s, recognizing what farmers walking the same ground for generations had dismissed as ordinary boulders. The site consists of a series of dolerite monoliths, arranged in a configuration that tracks solstices and equinoxes with functioning precision, still measurable today. Michael Tellinger, a South African author and researcher who popularized the site, has argued, alongside independent geologists, that surrounding stone circle ruins, and there are reportedly hundreds of thousands of similar circular stone structures scattered across the region, visible clearly in satellite imagery, represent the remnants of an ancient civilization whose scale dwarfs anything currently taught about pre-colonial southern Africa. Some proponents have suggested dates extending back tens of thousands of years, based on patterns of soil erosion and lichen growth on exposed stone surfaces, though these dating methods remain fiercely contested by mainstream archaeologists, who classify the majority of the stone circles as cattle enclosures and settlement foundations built by Bantu-speaking agriculturalists within the last few hundred to 2,000 years. The tension here is unusually sharp, even for this list. Mainstream South African archaeology, represented by researchers such as Professor Tim Maggs, has documented these circular stone ruins extensively, and dates the majority firmly within the last millennium, associating them with Soto-Tswana settlement patterns, complete with corroborating pottery and radiocarbon evidence. And yet Adam's calendar itself, the calendrical monoliths specifically, as distinct from the broader field of stone circles, has never been definitively dated using an accepted scientific method because the stones themselves cannot be carbon dated. Only the surrounding soil and any associated organic material can be, and results from those secondary methods have varied wildly depending on which layer is sampled. So which is it? A relatively recent agricultural settlement pattern, misread by enthusiasts eager to find lost antiquity, or the visible fragment of something genuinely older, hiding inside a landscape that mainstream archaeology has simply never had the funding or the institutional will to investigate at the necessary depth. Why does a calibrated astronomical monument sit at the center of hundreds of thousands of unexplained circular ruins? Why has so little formal excavation been conducted on structures visible from space? What does it mean that an entire continent's deep past remains this contested, this unexcavated, this unresolved? The stones keep their alignment regardless of who is arguing about them, tracking a solstice that has not missed an appointment in longer than anyone can prove. We leave the grasslands now and head east across the Indian Ocean, past the Asian mainland, to a stretch of seafloor off the southern coast of Japan's Yonaguni Island, where the true structure lies not above ground, but 15 to 25 meters beneath the surface of the Pacific. You are descending through clear tropical water as a diver, and beneath you resolves a shape no natural coral formation should produce. A massive rectangular monument with stepped terraces, sharp 90-degree angles, and what appears to be a wide staircase carved directly into stone, spanning roughly 150 meters in length and 40 meters in width. The formation was discovered in 1986 by a local dive tour operator, and it was brought to wider academic attention through the work of Masaaki Kimura, a marine geologist at the University of the Ryukyus, who has spent decades arguing that the structure is at least partially man-made. Kimura's central claim, published across several academic papers, is that the monument's precise, right-angled terracing, its straight edges, and what he identifies as carved holes and channel-like features cannot be adequately explained by natural sandstone fracturing alone. If artificial, and if it was constructed above water before later submersion, as the site's current depth would require given sea levels, Kimura has proposed a construction date as early as 10,000 years ago, placing it in the same conversation as Göbekli Tepe. Mainstream geologists disagree sharply. Robert Schoch, a geologist at Boston University who has personally dived the site, has argued that the Yonaguni monument is entirely natural, the product of the local sandstone's tendency to fracture along consistent, straight-edged bedding planes, a phenomenon documented in similar rock formations elsewhere in the region above water. The right angles, in this reading, are not evidence of tools. They're evidence of geology doing what sandstone does when it breaks. But here's what neither side can fully dismiss. Divers and researchers, including Kimura, have documented features on nearby underwater formations that appear to include carved animal figures. And one formation resembling a face has drawn particular attention. Natural fracturing doesn't typically produce figurative imagery. If even a fraction of these secondary features are artificial, the entire site's identity shifts from geological curiosity to the oldest submerged monument on Earth. Why does a formation looking unmistakably architectural sit at a depth consistent with sea levels from the last ice age? Why do two credentialed geologists, examining the same rock, reach such fundamentally opposed conclusions? What civilization, if any, stood on dry land here when the water was 50 meters lower than it is today? The monument sits in its blue silence, half buried in sediment, waiting for the tide of expert consensus to finally settle in one direction or the other, if it ever will. From the drowned coastline of Japan, we climb now into the thin, cold air of the Peruvian Andes, above the city of Cusco, to a fortress complex called Sacsayhuaman, elevation roughly 3,700 meters. You are standing before a zigzagging wall built from stone blocks so massive that the largest, known as the Say-White Stone, or sometimes simply the Sentinel, is estimated to weigh over 120 tons, heavier than a fully loaded Boeing 737. And here is what will unsettle you most. These multi-ton blocks are not simply stacked. They are fitted together with joints so tight that, even today, you cannot slide a sheet of paper or the blade of a knife between them without any mortar holding them in place. Conventional archaeology attributes Sacsayhuaman to the Inca Empire, with major construction phases dated to the reign of Pachacuti in the mid-15th century CE, and Spanish chroniclers including Pedro Cieza de Leon, writing shortly after the conquest in the 1550s, documented enormous Inca labor forces, some accounts suggesting over 20,000 workers, quarrying, transporting, and fitting stones using little more than bronze tools, ropes, ramps, and stone hammers. This is the mainstream position, and it is not without evidence. Quarry sites nearby show partially worked stones abandoned mid-process, and Inca engineering elsewhere demonstrates a documented mastery of ashlar masonry. But the anomaly here isn't whether the Inca could organize labor. It's whether bronze and stone tools alone can account for the precision of the joints, especially on stones this irregular in shape. Not neat rectangular blocks, but polygonal, multi-angled stones fitted together like a three-dimensional puzzle. where every single face meets its neighbor perfectly, on multiple planes simultaneously, across a structure spanning hundreds of meters. Structural engineers have pointed out that this style of interlocking polygonal masonry also happens to be extraordinarily seismic resistant. The stones can shift slightly during an earthquake and resettle into place, which is part of why Sacsayhuaman has survived multiple major earthquakes that leveled Spanish colonial buildings constructed with mortar directly nearby. Was this precision the product of extraordinary skill accumulated over generations? Or evidence, as alternative researchers, including the late Zechariah Sitchin, and more recent figures such as Brian Forster, have argued, of a much older substructure that the Inca inherited, reused, and built upon, rather than originated. Forster and others point to the presence of similar polygonal masonry techniques at multiple sites across the Andes, at Ollantaytambo, Tiwanaku, and elsewhere, arguing for a shared, older engineering tradition rather than independent Inca invention at each location. Mainstream archaeologists counter that stylistic continuity is normal cultural transmission, not evidence of a lost predecessor civilization. Why does no clear intermediate stage of the technique appear in the archaeological record? No obviously developing polygonal masonry, only the fully mature, essentially flawless version. How did workers move and lift blocks in excess of 100 tons up a mountainside using ropes and ramps alone? Why does this exact style of stonework, unmatched anywhere else on Earth outside the Andes, appear seemingly complete rather than evolved? The wall still stands, indifferent to earthquakes, indifferent to 5 centuries of argument, its jointless seams holding a silence more precise than any explanation offered for them. We descend from the mountain now, but not into another landscape, into the earth directly beneath our feet, into the Cappadocia region of central Turkey, to the underground city of Derinkuyu. You are walking down a narrow, low-ceilinged tunnel, and the passage keeps descending, level after level, eventually reaching a depth of approximately 85 meters below the surface, roughly the height of a 20-story building, inverted into the rock. This entire city was carved not into caves, but out of solid volcanic tuff, a soft stone that hardens on exposure to air. And it was designed to house an estimated 20,000 people, along with their livestock and food stores, complete with functioning ventilation shafts, wells, wine and oil presses, chapels, stables, and communal kitchens. Derinkuyu was rediscovered by modern researchers in 1963, when a local resident renovating his home in the Nevşehir province broke through a wall and found a hidden tunnel leading into the complex, a structure so extensive it had apparently been forgotten by living memory. Despite sitting directly beneath an inhabited town, archaeologists, including those working with the Turkish Ministry of Culture, have connected Derinkuyu to Phrygian, Byzantine, and possibly even earlier occupation phases, with some researchers proposing the earliest excavation phases date back as far as the 8th century BCE, though the soft volcanic rock makes precise dating of the tunnels themselves extraordinarily difficult, since there is no organic material embedded directly in the excavated stone to test. What genuinely defies easy explanation is the engineering discipline required to keep an 18-level underground city connected to at least a dozen other underground settlements in the region via tunnel networks, including one linking to the underground city of Kaymaklı, roughly 9 kilometers away, properly ventilated at that depth. More than 50 ventilation shafts, some plunging the full 85 meters, were positioned with enough precision to maintain breathable air for thousands of people and animals living underground for extended periods, likely sheltering from invading armies during periods of regional conflict. Massive circular stone doors, some weighing over half a ton, could be rolled into place from the inside only, sealing off levels against intruders, an internal defensive mechanism requiring a level of collaborative planning that implies long-term habitation, not panicked, improvised refuge. The mainstream explanation holds that Derinkuyu was expanded incrementally over centuries by successive cultures fleeing persecution or invasion, Christians hiding from Roman authorities, later populations sheltering from Arab raids during the 7th through 10th centuries. This is well supported by textual and structural evidence in the upper levels. But the deepest, oldest layers remain the least understood, the least dated, and the most structurally ambitious. Engineering sophistication here does not increase with time. It stays constant, top to bottom. Why did an entire underground metropolis, engineered to shelter tens of thousands of people, fall so completely out of use and memory that its existence was rediscovered by accident in 1963? What were the earliest occupants of this depth actually hiding from? Somewhere under the surface of central Turkey, the ventilation shafts still pull fresh air down into chambers that haven't held their original purpose in centuries, breathing quietly for no one. Now we travel to the Bolivian Altiplano, to an archaeological site so architecturally strange that even mainstream Andean specialists describe it with visible discomfort. Puma Punku, part of the greater Tiwanaku complex, elevation nearly 3,850 meters, in one of the most oxygen-thin, agriculturally hostile environments on the continent. You are standing among scattered ruins, because that's what remains. Ruins, not standing structures, surrounded by precisely cut stone blocks with perfectly flat surfaces, 90-degree interior angles, and complex geometric notches and drill holes so uniform across multiple stones that if you set two blocks side by side from opposite corners of the site, their cut patterns match, with what researchers have described as near-industrial tolerances. The stone itself is the first problem. Much of Puma Punku is constructed from red sandstone quarried roughly 10 kilometers away, but the more intricately carved elements are made of andesite, a much harder volcanic rock, quarried from a site nearly 100 kilometers distant near Lake Titicaca, requiring transport across water and difficult terrain without the wheel or draft animals suited to the altitude. Mainstream archaeologists, including Alexei Vranic, who conducted extensive fieldwork and three-dimensional reconstruction of the site through the University of Pennsylvania and later UCLA, attribute construction primarily to the Tiwanaku civilization, with major building phases dated through radiocarbon analysis to between 500 and 600 CE, using stone-on-stone grinding techniques, copper alloy tools, and enormous, well-organized labor forces. The anomaly lies in the precision itself. The H-shaped andesite blocks found at the site, nicknamed H-blocks by researchers, feature identical, repeating geometric patterns cut into hard volcanic stone, with what appears to be remarkably consistent depth and angle, the kind of standardization modern manufacturing associates with molds or machine tooling rather than hand-ground copper tools. Some independent researchers and engineers, including authors like Brian Forster, who has spent years documenting the site, have argued that reproducing these cuts using Tiwanaku-era technology is essentially untested and unproven experimentally. Nobody has definitively replicated the H-block's precision using only the tools archaeologists say were available. Vranic and mainstream colleagues counter that immense time, patience, abrasive grinding stones, and a large skilled workforce operating over generations can account for the precision without invoking anything beyond known Tiwanaku capability, and point to unfinished stones at the site showing clear evidence of a labor-intensive, incremental carving process, not one-shot machine tooling. Complicating the picture further, some fringe researchers, including the controversial Arthur Poznansky in the early 20th century, proposed based on astronomical alignment calculations that Puma Punku's original construction could date back over 10,000 years, tying the site to a much older lake shoreline level, though this dating has been thoroughly rejected by the modern archaeological consensus, which relies on the more recent, better supported radiocarbon evidence. Still, the disagreement over Puma Punku's dating remains unusually persistent for a site this well studied. Why does a hard volcanic stone display machine-like standardization using tools that have never been shown, in controlled testing, to replicate that precision? Why does this specific site, among all Andean ruins, generate the sharpest and most persistent friction between mainstream chronology and outlier hypotheses? What process actually stood between raw andesite boulders and these interlocking, mathematically consistent blocks? The stones lie scattered now, tumbled by time and possibly by earthquake, fragments of a structure whose original completed form nobody living has ever actually seen. From the high desert of Bolivia we cross an ocean and half a continent, to the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, to a Roman temple complex called Baalbek, and specifically to its foundation, the Trilithon. You are standing at the base of a retaining wall built from 3 megalithic limestone blocks, each measuring approximately 19 meters in length, and weighing an estimated 800 tons apiece. For context, 800 tons is roughly equivalent to the weight of 2 fully loaded Airbus A380 aircraft stacked together, carved from solid rock and moved without cranes, without engines, without the wheel serving any meaningful role on this terrain. The temple complex above the Trilithon was built by the Romans beginning in the 1st century BCE, dedicated to Jupiter, and its scale is undisputed as one of the largest religious structures in the Roman world. But the foundation stones beneath it, including a nearby, still unquarried megalith known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, or Hajar al-Hibla, weighing an estimated 1,000 tons, and an even larger stone discovered still partially buried in the same quarry in 2014, estimated by German researchers from the German Archaeological Institute to weigh close to 1,650 tons, represent the largest cut stone blocks ever moved by human beings in the ancient world, full stop, surpassing even the largest stones used at Giza by a significant margin. Mainstream historians attribute the Trilithon's placement to Roman engineering, theorizing the use of massive wooden sledges, hundreds of laborers, and log rollers or a soap and water lubrication technique to reduce friction, similar to methods documented for other large stone transports in antiquity. This is entirely plausible from an engineering standpoint using known Roman capabilities. But no clear documentation, Roman or otherwise, describes this specific feat, and structural engineers examining the physics involved have noted that moving an 800-ton block, even a short distance, would require a taut rope network and workforce coordination on a scale barely matched anywhere else in the historical record. Plausible, but at the absolute extreme edge of what ancient technology is documented to have achieved, using techniques that, as far as we know, the Romans never needed or attempted at this scale anywhere else in their empire. And this is where the deeper unease sets in. Some researchers, including engineer Christopher Dunn, who has written extensively about precision stoneworking in the ancient world, have pointed to evidence suggesting the Trilithon platform may predate the Roman temple built atop it, incorporated by Roman builders rather than originated by them. Roman structures are famous for reusing existing foundations and monuments, and no definitive proof exists that the Romans themselves quarried and placed the largest of these stones, rather than inheriting an already established, pre-existing megalithic platform. If that's true, who moved a 1,650-ton stone before the Romans arrived, and why? Why does no surviving Roman text boast about what would have been, by any measure, one of the single greatest engineering triumphs in their empire's history? Why was an even larger megalith left in the quarry, apparently abandoned mid-transport, as though the project itself was interrupted? The valley holds its silence in limestone, an 800-ton question mark, sitting exactly where someone, for some reason nobody can fully reconstruct, decided to stop. And now, finally, we arrive at the structure that started all of it, the one every list like this one inevitably returns to, on the Giza Plateau outside Cairo. You are standing at the base of the Great Pyramid at dawn, the last of the 7 wonders of the ancient world still substantially intact, and above you rises 2.3 million individual limestone and granite blocks, some in the interior chambers weighing up to 80 tons, arranged into a structure that until the completion of the Lincoln Cathedral spire in 1311 CE, nearly 4,000 years later, was the tallest man-made structure on Earth. The mainstream chronology, supported by radiocarbon dating of organic material found in mortar, Worker graffiti discovered inside relieving chambers referencing the 4th dynasty pharaoh Khufu, and the discovery of an associated workers' village and administrative papyri, including the Diary of Mera, uncovered in 2013 at Wadi al-Jarf, and detailing the logistics of limestone transport to Giza, places construction at approximately 2560 BCE, over a period of roughly 20 years, using a rotating labor force of skilled workers, not slaves, organized with remarkable administrative sophistication. This is one of the best documented achievements in ancient history. And yet the anomalies compound the moment you look closely at the engineering. The Great Pyramid's base is level to within just a few centimeters, across a footprint covering over 5 hectares. Its 4 sides align to true north with an accuracy of within 1/15 of 1 degree, a level of astronomical precision that modern surveying, without satellite positioning, would struggle to match. The King's Chamber is constructed from massive granite blocks quarried at Aswan, nearly 800 kilometers to the south, transported down the Nile, and lifted into position over 60 meters above ground level. Physicist Kate Spence at Cambridge University has proposed that the pyramid's near-perfect north alignment was achieved using a stellar observation technique tracking 2 circumpolar stars, a method requiring sustained astronomical record-keeping across generations to calibrate correctly. The friction here isn't over who built it, or even roughly when. It's over how, precisely, a civilization without pulleys of the type used in later antiquity, without iron tools capable of easily cutting granite, and without draft animal power suited to hauling multi-ton stones up ramps, achieved tolerances that modern construction, with cranes and lasers, still finds genuinely difficult to replicate on this scale. Egyptologists, including Mark Lehner, who has spent decades excavating the workers' village at Giza, argue convincingly for ramp systems, wooden sledges, wetted sand to reduce friction, documented in a famous tomb painting showing exactly this technique, and enormous, well-fed, well-organized labor forces. Alternative researchers point to unresolved questions the ramp theory still struggles to answer cleanly. No single ramp theory yet proposed accounts for the internal placement of the multi-ton granite roofing slabs above the King's Chamber, without requiring an almost impossibly steep or impossibly long ramp structure, and no definitive physical remains of whichever specific ramp system was used have been conclusively identified at Giza itself, despite exhaustive searching. Why does the interior granite portcullis system, designed to seal the burial chamber, show tolerances more consistent with precision machining than hand tooling? Why does the pyramid's geometry encode mathematical relationships, including a ratio closely approximating pi in its height-to-perimeter proportions, that even mainstream Egyptologists disagree on whether the builders intended deliberately or arrived at incidentally through practical construction methods? Why, 4,500 years later, with every modern advantage available to us, do engineers still debate exactly how this was done, rather than simply knowing? The pyramid still holds its perfect alignment under the same sun that watched it built, keeping its geometry exact while every explanation offered for it slowly erodes at the edges. 10 structures. 10 places where the story we've been told about who we are and what our ancestors could do quietly stops making sense. A temple built by people who weren't supposed to have temples yet. A city built into a lagoon by hands with no tools for it. A cavern carved and never explained. A calendar that still works on a continent history keeps underestimating. A monument underwater that might be older than the ice that once locked away the sea. A wall that laughs at earthquakes. A city buried beneath the ground, still breathing, still remembered by no one who built it. Stones cut like they came off an assembly line, in a place with no assembly lines. A megalith heavier than airliners, moved by hands history refuses to name. And a pyramid that still, after 45 centuries, keeps its geometry more perfect than we can casually explain. If you found even one of these unsettling, sit with the fact that there are 10, and that this list only scratches the surface of what's out there, quietly waiting in soil and stone across every inhabited continent on Earth. We are not telling you what to believe. We're telling you what the evidence actually says. Where mainstream and alternative interpretations genuinely diverge, and where the honest answer, right now, today, is simply that we don't know. That's not a failure of archaeology. It's an invitation. If you're the kind of person who'd rather sit with an uncomfortable question than accept a comfortable answer, you already know what to do. Subscribe so the next mystery finds you the moment we publish it. Like this video if your sense of history just shifted even slightly under your feet. And share it with the one person in your life who always asks, but how do we actually know that? Because they're going to want to see this. We'll see you in the next one, standing somewhere else ancient, asking the same honest question. What else don't we know?